Hi, this is Matthew again. Today I want to talk to you about a new report that finds abortions in Minnesota have increased since the U.S. Supreme Court's Dobbs decision last year that overturned Roe v. Wade. This is the second of a two-part video series on abortion statistics in Minnesota. If you haven't watched the first video, you can find it on our website at nehemiahreset.org or on our rumble.com account. A recent study from the national group We Count said that the number of abortions during the past year decreased overall, but states like Minnesota, with abortion protections, saw an increase. Officials with Planned Parenthood North Central states said they've been working to expand capacity to meet the rising need for in-clinic appointments and telehealth appointments where drugs are sent through the mail and patients walk through the process with a provider on screen. Those patients who are from Minnesota who are eligible for that service don't have to come to a health center, said Traxler, the Planned Parenthood chief medical officer. That actually leaves a lot of space open for people who are traveling from out of state, where they're not eligible for medication abortion by mail, so they can be seen in our brick-and-mortar health center and not necessarily take the appointment spot of someone who's living in Minnesota. More out-of-state patients are choosing procedural, rather than medication, abortions, according to Planned Parenthood. That figure is up to 53%, compared to 35% prior to the Dobbs decision. That may be because, in some cases, patients feel more comfortable going through the process in clinic. It's just a very volatile world out there. And I think there's something incredibly reassuring about connecting with a provider in person, seeing medication in person, having a conversation in person, said Emily Morbacher with the Midwest Access Coalition. Certainly, if you're doing an in-clinic procedure, just being able to leave that facility knowing like this part of your process is done versus the kind of volatility of the U.S. Postal Service or where something's getting mailed to. Or are you in a safe place to do a telehealth appointment? Or is someone going to walk in? But it also comes with its own drawbacks. Traveling takes time, and every day counts when it comes to accessing a timely abortion. Now let's look at some statistics regarding abortions in Minnesota. In 2022, there were 12,175 abortions reported in Minnesota, an increase of 20% from 2021 when there were 10,138 abortions. Chemical abortions made up 61% of the total, increasing by 20% from 6,154 in 2021 to 7,391 in 2022. The Charlotte Lozier Institute, CLI, estimates that Minnesota's abortion rate also increased by 20% from 2021 to 11.1 abortions per 1,000 women ages 15 to 44. As of August 2023, 14 states have released 2022 abortion statistics, with 10 states indicating that abortions had increased from the prior year. 83% of Minnesota abortions reported in 2022 were carried out on state residents, while 17% were performed on women from other states, an increase from 10% in 2021. The number of women from North Dakota, Iowa, and Texas seeking abortions in Minnesota all tripled compared to the previous year, with the number of women from Texas coming to Minnesota increasing eightfold. The increases in women traveling to Minnesota from out of state may be explained by the apparent unenforceability of any gestational abortion limits in Minnesota and the pro-life laws in the aforementioned states that were allowed to go into effect after the Dobbs decision. A majority of Minnesota abortions were performed on women in their 20s, with 28% on women ages 20 to 24 and 27% on women ages 25 to 29. 32% were obtained by women in their 30s. 9% were performed on girls under the age of 20, including 3% on girls under age 18. 4% were performed on women over the age of 40. The age of women was not reported for 22 abortions. 48% of the abortions reported in 2022 were performed on white women, 25% on black women, and 6% on Asian women. 3% were obtained by American Indian women, and 12% were on women of other races. Race was not reported for 7% of the abortions. CLI estimates that Minnesota's black abortion rate was 31.4 abortions per 1,000 women ages 15 to 44, nearly 5 times the white rate of 6.7. 80% of the abortions were on non-Hispanic women and 11% on Hispanic women, while ethnicity was not reported for 8%. Unmarried women accounted for a large majority of the abortions reported in Minnesota, 80%, compared to just 13% on married women and 7% on women of unknown marital status. The majority of Minnesota abortions were performed on women who graduated from high school. 26% were obtained by women with a high school diploma as their highest level of education, 21% on women who had attended some college, and 25% on women with a college degree. 9% of Minnesota abortions were performed on women who had not graduated from high school, while 19% were on women whose level of education was not reported. 58% of Minnesota abortions were obtained by women with a previous live birth, including over 22% on women with one prior live birth and more than 35% on women with two or more live births. 38% of the abortions reported in 2022 were performed on women who had previously had an abortion. 22% were obtained by women with one previous abortion, and 16% by women with more than one prior abortion. 42% of Minnesota abortions were performed on women with no prior live births, and 62% were on women with no previous abortions. 20% were obtained by women who had previously suffered a miscarriage. A majority of the abortions reported in Minnesota, 61%, were chemical abortions. Most of the chemical abortions were induced using mifepristone, 59% of all abortions reported in Minnesota, while 2% were induced using misoprostol as the principal drug. There was one other chemical abortion, a category that includes late-term induction abortions. Just under one-third of the abortions, 32%, were performed via duct suction curettage and 7% were dilation and evacuation procedures. There was one abortion performed using hysterectomy or hysterotomy, and another was performed via some other type of surgical procedure. Over two-thirds of the abortions, 66%, took place earlier than 9 weeks of gestation. 16% were performed between 9 and 10 weeks, and 6% occurred between 11 and 12 weeks. 5% were performed between 13 and 15 weeks, and 4% between 16 and 20 weeks of gestation. There were 227 abortions, 2%, at 21 weeks of gestation or later. The gestational age was not reported for 85 abortions. What were some of the complications from the abortions in 2022? There were 104 intraoperative complications, or complications identified at the time of the abortion procedure and reported on the abortion reporting form. Multiple complications could be reported for a single abortion. There were 5 cases of both cervical lacerations and heavy bleeding or hemorrhage. There was 1 case of uterine perforation. Lastly, there were 93 unspecified complications. There were 12,073 abortions reported with 0 complications. Additionally, there were 36 postoperative complication reports submitted with information on 39 complications. The complication reports do not indicate where the abortion was performed or the residence of the woman, so Minnesota's report cautions that this data cannot be used to produce a complication rate per abortion procedure. There were 19 failed abortions in which the pregnancy was ongoing and 13 incomplete abortions in which pieces of the unborn baby or other pregnancy tissue were left in the woman's uterus. There were 3 instances of cervical laceration that required suture stitches or other forms of repair and 2 instances each of heavy bleeding or hemorrhage and infections that required hospitalization. Minnesota is one of 17 states to use its own tax dollars to fund abortion, and 41% of Minnesota abortions were funded through public assistance in 2022. 18% were covered by private insurance, and 42% were self-pay. Minnesota requires abortion providers to report the methods used to dispose of the bodies of unborn babies killed by abortion. In 2022, 25% were cremated, and 0.2%, 24 abortions, were buried. 75% had not reached the stage of development to be legally required to be reported as fetal remains. A majority of abortions, 58%, were performed in Planned Parenthood's 4 Minnesota centers. 8% were reported by Whole Woman's Health, 7% by Robbinsdale Clinic, and 4% by Women's Health Center. An additional 22% were reported by hospitals, doctors' offices, and small clinics, an increase from just 7% in 2021. Overall, 82% of Minnesota abortions occurred in clinics and 1% occurred in hospitals, 147 abortions as outpatient procedures and 7 on an inpatient basis. 10 abortions were performed in ambulatory surgery centers. 1 abortion was performed in a doctor's office. This type of facility was not reported for 17% of Minnesota abortions. 95 doctors performed abortions in Minnesota in 2022. Not quite half, 45, of the doctors performed fewer than 10 abortions each, including 28 doctors who reported just 1 abortion each. Overall, 70 doctors performed fewer than 100 abortions each. 19 doctors performed between 100 and 499 abortions, and 3 doctors performed between 500 and 999 abortions. 2 doctors performed between 1,000 and 1,499 abortions, and 1 doctor performed 1,893 abortions. No babies were reported to have been born alive during abortions in Minnesota in 2022. In 2022, women undergoing abortions in Minnesota were asked to share their reasons for getting an abortion. Women could offer more than one reason. The most frequent reasons were elective, does not want children at this time, 60%. Economic reasons, 12%. And emotional health, 9%. Only 5% of the abortions were performed because of the woman's physical health, while 35 abortions were performed because a major bodily function was endangered by the pregnancy. 52 abortions were performed because a woman's pregnancy was a result of rape and 9 due to incest. 2% of the abortions were due to fetal anomalies. Another 2% were performed for other reasons. 31% of the women declined to share a reason. In summary, Minnesota is a destination for abortions from surrounding states and other states with more restrictive rules than Minnesota. In 2023, the state of Minnesota passed more liberal laws than any of the surrounding states. These liberal laws are the reason that so many women now choose to get an abortion in Minnesota. As Christians, we must continue to fight to pass more conservative laws in Minnesota to reduce the number of abortions. We must remember that the reason for almost all abortions is unprotected sex. Our society has become more promiscuous, and the development of unwanted babies as a result. Could our society take more steps to prevent these unwanted pregnancies, for example, teaching our students about abstinence? I hope this provides a good look at the abortion issue after the ruling on Roe v. Wade. This issue has become a big issue for the left because they fear that with the defeat all states would pass legislation eliminating abortion. In reality, many states, like Minnesota, have passed legislation more liberal than what existed as part of the national law. The reality is that today, the right's idea that abortion will be eliminated as a result of the defeat of Roe v. Wade is a pipe dream. It is more realistic that the abortion laws could possibly be changed to be more baby-friendly. Certainly, there are many options for mothers who don't want their baby. There are hundreds of couples who would like to adopt who today seek options overseas. The real problem with the changes in the abortion laws is that we treat the death of a baby before birth and at the moment of birth as if it was not a human being. Minnesota's change to make abortion more liberal is a great example of that. If the baby is murdered as a result of an abortion, that is not considered murder, but if it is killed as a result of a gunshot or stabbing before it is born, it is considered murder. This is how crazy our society has gotten. We need to pray that our leaders will consider this issue from a saner standpoint and create a more sane answer. In the meantime, we need to support our more conservative leaders on this issue. If you want to see other videos on cultural issues, go to our website at nehemiahreset.com or our rumble.com account. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future on another of our videos. Sign up to be notified of our new videos once per week by going to our website. I hope you have a great day.